I can get us going. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Welcome to all of you. And what we're going to do is kind of have three components to the presentation today. I'll provide an overview of the biblical text, John 9, 1 through 41. We didn't read the entire chapter in our worship today, but the text itself goes from 1 through 41. After I've done that, and that's going to be more presentation, and so after about 10-15 minutes or so, Carol will lead us in a discussion, kind of in terms of ways that we have blind spots, and for people to kind of share blind spots that they see within the Christian community as well as in their own lives. And then finally, Michael Stetzler will do a brief comments at the end, inviting us into deeper study and action toward being a welcoming and inclusive community of faith. And so that's kind of the route we're going. The biblical passage or text tells the story of a man born blind who encounters Jesus and is healed. He receives his physical sight, but during the course of the story, he gains increasing insight and comes to a relationship with Jesus. In contrast, some of the religious leaders of the day are caught in their own narrow mindset, and they believe that they see clearly, but even though they have physical sight, they sink deeper and deeper into blindness. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. One of the problematic things, and I'm going to share my screen here. And let's see here.
Says your speaker is not working. Please check your connection or
I'm going to share my screen and everybody getting that?
Yes.
Okay, good. There's a very problematic passage right at the beginning of this reading, and that's I've got three different versions of it here, and first of all, the NRSV, which we use typically, responds to the question raised by the disciples: who sinned, this man or his parents? And so we get at Jesus' response. And in the NRSV, Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. To me, that seems somewhat capricious and a bit insecure on God's part to inflict someone with blindness so that God can get glory. And yet that's a pretty typical response to it and translation. The interesting thing is that the part in red here, he was born blind, is nowhere in the text, in the Greek text. The Greek text, of course, does not use punctuation and does not have capitals, does not have some of the things that we would use to increase our understanding. But the word so that, or hina in the Greek, connects two things, typically. And what the translators of the NRSV did was they understood, because the prior question had been who sinned, that he was born blind, was that the connecting so that was between he was born blind and then the following, so that God's works might be revealed in him. I'd like you, especially, let's see if I can move this. Can you see that column under Craig Kester?
Yes.
Okay. The Kester translation, and he's professor at Luther Seminary, and he said that the NRSV translation is probably the worst translation in the NRSV, that it uses that he was born blind. And what Kester points out is that neither this man nor his parents sinned, that corresponds, but in order that, he skips the he was born blind, but in order that God's works might be revealed in him, we must do the work. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. And so his connection there is that in order that we do the works that we are called to do today, so that we might reveal or have God's work revealed to us. And I think that falls in line with some of John's theology and seems to be a more accurate translation of this passage. And I think provides for me, anyway, a bit more comfort level in what message is being spoken at this point. And it gives us the challenge to be participants in God's work. And as participants in God's work, we also have the work of God revealed to us. And we see God's work at hand. And I think that's a really helpful point to make at the outset of this passage. I think the second thing that overshadows or kind of runs through this passage is Jesus as the light of the world and what the purpose of that light is. And we know that if we're in a dark space and go outside on a bright, sunshiny winter day with the light reflecting off the snow and that, we can be blinded by the light. And so I think light in our world can reveal things to us and open our eyes so that we become not so blind, but it can also blind us. And so Jesus' presence in the world and in this chapter seems to enlighten the blind man and bring him to a point of vision and faith. Well, with the Pharisees or some of the religious leaders, it reveals or shows a blindness. And so we see this progression of the work of the light of the world to reveal and give sight and also to reveal blindness. Now, if we go to if we look at the blind man in the progression, when he's first asked about who healed you, he said, the man called Jesus. And he said, I don't know where he is. The second time, and he's in discussion with people about Jesus, he kicks that up a notch. He's a prophet. He's a prophet. In further discussion, as the religious leaders are kind of hammering it out with him and are challenging or questioning Jesus' role as from God, the man says, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And so he moves from this man called Jesus to he's a prophet to he's from God. And then the last interchange between Jesus and the blind man, Jesus says, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he says, I don't know who the Son of Man is. And Jesus says, I'm standing before you. I'm the Son of Man. And the blind man's response is, Lord, I believe. And then it says, and he worshiped him. So this progression of the blind man to from blindness to sight is also a journey of faith and a journey of insight into the person of Jesus, and comes to a relationship with Jesus. In contrast, when the man is healed, the bystanders first are seeking to understand, and they ask some questions. And then the religious leader says, this man's not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. And they were divided, it says. Later on, it says, as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. And then says to the blind man who's testifying, you were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us? And they drove him out. That hardening and that descent into deeper blindness. And then their last question to Jesus, surely we are not blind, are we? And so we have the progression in two different ways. The blind man coming to sight and relationship with Jesus, and those who are opposed to Jesus are standing firmer in their disbelief. Now, I'd like to talk just real briefly about what this passage tends to Thomas is commenting and writes about Kant's and
You're cutting out, Steve.
have you seen that any place?
Yeah, we see it,
You
but
see that in
your audio is cutting in and out.
Society?
Your
What's that,
audio. Go ahead, you're frozen.
A little bit. So is it coming through now?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you seen that in our society today, that cognitive dissonance that occurs when reality does not confirm our expectations, but we could keep believing what we had previously believed? You know, I don't want to get overly political, but
Sure you did.
isn't that the message from Donald Trump these days? No matter how much evidence there is given or lack of evidence for the election was stolen, that message continues to be proclaimed. And it's a belief or a worldview that then prohibits understanding or believing what's in front of us. So Slater goes on, we reject facts every day when they do not confirm our long-held belief, our long-held beliefs. No amount of evidence can convince us. If we do not believe something is possible, for us, it is not possible. This is unfortunate because it closes us off from new knowledge, information, and resources. It's doubly unfortunate when it relates to people, because we reject the humanity of another human. And so we see in this story the lack of status for the blind man who had a personal experience that he could share was discounted, and he finally was driven out. We also have the mindset or worldview that God won't do anything that requires work on the Sabbath. And so they discount what Jesus did and discard it as even possibly being a work of God. And so the Jewish establishment refused to acknowledge that a Galilean Jewish rabbi could actually do some good, no matter what outcome they saw. Too frequently, we confuse persons with strong beliefs with persons with deep faith. Persons with strong beliefs have to be heard. They constantly affirm the tradition. They constantly hold to their mindset. They oppose innovation. They confess their loyalty to a loving and gracious God, but they themselves are unloving and ungracious. They own the center of the stage. And when pressed, they always do what is expedient or what is convenient, as long as it protects their worldview. On the other hand, he says, people with deep faith affirm the tradition, but are open to new perspectives and new methods without being threatened. They take to heart God's amazing grace and his love, and believe that they must mirror God's grace and love in their own lives. They do not do what is expedient or convenient. They do what is right, regardless of how it might look. And I think Pastor Peter's sermon today touches on that sort of thing, that deep faith that enables someone to deal with a change in mindset, a change in worldview based on the experienced facts. So we see in this passage, this chapter, a worldview that was fixed. If you work on Sabbath, you're in opposition to the work of God. But the challenge for us is to check our worldview for Jesus, because Jesus showed that now is always the time to do the work of God. It's not dependent on Sabbath or not, but if the work of God is there for us to do, it is there for us to do now. We can celebrate what God is doing when we don't reject facts that challenge our worldview, but allow the facts to open us up to God's work in new settings, in new times, and in and through new people. And that's really what our discussion is going to be about today, as Carol will lead us to talk about how are we blind? How can we see and grow in our vision? So I'll turn it over to Carol and quit sharing my screen. There.
Okay, so the committee had asked me to look at two things. I think the way that Steve had put it was invite discussion on how we grow in seeing Jesus and ways in which we can be blind, both as individuals and as a faith community in our society, etc. So I think today we're kind of centering on the blind man as an example of how he grows in seeing Jesus. But I also recommend that you go back and look at all the other witnesses, reread John up to this point, and look at how all those different people who come into the presence of Jesus either grow or don't grow. And there are, according to Caroline Lewis, and you can see it, definite parallels on them. And you see patterns that the different conversations go through in growing to see Jesus. One thing is that Jesus often, not every time, but usually is the one that instigates discussion. And he will say something and get a response and get a conversation going. And then there's questions that the person asks, oftentimes on tradition, on what we know about God from scripture or from our ancestry for those that are in John. And then Jesus kind of leads them into looking at it in a different way, opening us to different and new viewpoints, different viewpoints. And either they accept that and become a believer and a witness and a disciple, or they become more set against it in fear, anxiety. Caroline Lewis, in her commentary on chapters 7, 8, that are so strong in their arguments between Jesus and the leaders, you see the anxiety and the fear that's kind of growing, and the division, and then finally shutting out the people. And so looking back and examining what's going on, and then also how the person changes, the person's identity and how they see themselves. The person who's blind, and then it's the person who used to be blind, and the person who knows the name of Jesus and then becomes a witness, and then a person of faith, and then the blind man actually comes to a point of worship, the first one to actually do that in the gospel. So anyway, how do we see Jesus? How do we grow in faith in Jesus, or in God? Maybe we can reflect on that in a couple of breakout groups, and also the question of what are our blind spots. Today in the sermon, we hear about the transgendered child, and in the gospel, we hear about a begging blind man that was not seen by people as a human being. So where do we have our blind spots? So maybe we can break out into groups for 10 minutes, Peter?
I'm working on it. You bet.
Okay, and then so talk about how do we see Jesus? How do we grow in Jesus? What makes us see Jesus in a new way? What's inviting us into a deeper relationship with God? And then where are our blind spots against other people in society or in our communities or in ourselves? How have we grown as individuals?
All right, here we go.
Okay.
Thanks. Here they come.
Okay,
Carol,
so
you're muted.
yeah,
There you go.
I just realized that. So maybe we can take a few minutes to share any insights that your groups had. And actually, we spent all of our time on the first question, how do we see Jesus? And we really didn't get much to listing our blind spots specifically. We kind of talked how we had them a little bit, but anyway, anyone want to comment or share from what your group triggered or thought about? Remember,
As long as nobody's going, blabbermouth will try. Can you hear me?
yeah,
Okay. We were in a small group that was dysfunctional because we couldn't get things going. And finally, we had a little bit of a conversation, but we kind of thought that a blind spot, and I'm probably mischaracterizing this, but Jesus never told us to never take a chance. He did not say your main responsibility in life is to make sure that you are secure, and yet that kind of becomes our default mechanism in evaluating what we should do. Now, I'm afraid that doesn't tie into the story as well as I thought it would. But
well, I think it does. I think it does. I mean, if you think of the blind man in his growing faith or growing realization of who Jesus is, finally comes down to taking the risk of saying, yeah, he's the Son of God, and he worships Jesus, and he's thrown out of the synagogue. So he's taken his risk, and the fact that the parents were afraid to say anything because of being thrown out.
right.
So the risk is there in the story, that's for sure.
And I guess my follow-up to that would be that if we're comfortable, we're not following Jesus.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. I agree with that.
You know, one thing our group talked about was, or I brought it up and the community had an answer, was that if we have blind spots, how can we see them if they're blind spots to us? And the thought was that the community that we're in helps us see those blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah, we said something a little similar in our group, bringing up the relationships that we make one-on-one as being extremely important to open our eyes and to get us to understand. And then also just what's been going on in the news in the last few years, that we are exposed to other viewpoints, and hopefully that opens us up to see the other as actually not an other, but someone who is a human being who has a different experience than we do. Yeah, Peter.
That we had this day calendar on brain health, and it said that one thing that's good for brain health is to have more diversity in your inner circle. So if you're around, people who are thinking differently, that's really good for you for thinking differently.
Yeah, diversity is great. Diversity in nature and diversity in our thinking. Yeah. Any others?
A question on that, do you recognize others blind spots?
Do we recognize other people's blind spots?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Or is that just your interpretation?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it just your interpretation that they're blind? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Or
Uh-huh.
maybe unseen. Pardon the expression.
Along that line, Kurt, if there's two groups and each side thinks they're right and that the other side has the blind spot, how do we decide? How do you accept the other side's thoughts when we think they're wrong and they think we're wrong? So,
That happens all the time. How do
Of
you
course,
cope with it? How do you cope with that?
of course, they always say, what's the verse about always seeing the blind spot in other people so much easier than we do in ourselves?
That I think is where humility is required. And I think that's where that quote that talked about deep faith versus how did it put it? The difference between strong beliefs and deep faith. And we can have strong beliefs that blind us to the reality of faith, I think. And so our group did talk about the necessity of people and that diversity in opening us up to see Jesus on the one hand, but I think also to recognize some of our blind spots.
I was trying to understand what Kurt was saying, and I think the only way that we can overcome what I think he may have been getting at is if we talk honestly to each other so that we make the attempt to understand where the other person is coming from. We should always assume, I believe, that they have something correct to say and dig to find what the piece of truth is that they're trying to say. That becomes a problem because we disagree. And a lot of us, myself included, probably tend to get truculent when I disagree with somebody, rather than be honestly trying to figure out what they mean.
Yeah, Jean.
Thank you, Rick. That was helpful and reminds me about not being judgmental without listening to others. What I wanted to say personally for myself, what the COVID years, these last 2 years have done, I realize the isolation, but I've done less and less, and I've become more unsure about things that I regularly did or reached out. And the isolation can set a person even more solidly in their old way of thinking and doing things. And that's just saying personal things that I've been thinking about myself. To risk to get out again, to overcome some of those unsure feelings I have about myself and what I can do and what I can risk. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
Mm-hmm,
Sure does.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's where I've appreciated the daily devotions that have been published. I think it helps tie me together and helps me think broader and stuff. So I'm grateful for Prince of Peace's daily emails on that.
Yeah, Anne.
In a way, isn't it kind of a simple situation. I like that strong beliefs. If you have strong beliefs, you can read the paper, you can listen to the news, you can read it how you want to read it, and you are not opened up to whatever, to the other person's opinion, the relationships. So that's a blind spot when you just do not, if you read something you don't like, just stop reading it. And that's not what we need to do. We need to be open.
That makes me think too of something I started to say to my group, and then got cut short by time. But Caroline Lewis, I've been reading her commentary, and she keeps emphasizing, and especially in this chapter too, that the Gospel of John has a definition of what sin is and what judgment is, and we need to pay attention to that. And that sin, to the Gospel of John, to that writer, is the lack of relationship, of intimate relationship with God. And that the Jewish leaders, fell back to looking at the tradition of Moses or to Abraham, and making that the key primary point of their relationship with God as tradition, and not open to how God is working in the world today, and through Jesus and through the blind man and through the various things that are going on around them. They're not open to that kind of new thing, that new relationship. And that the idea of judgment, it says that, God, Jesus says he didn't come into the world to judge. He says that God doesn't judge us, that we end up judging ourselves. And I've always, that's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way in some way to talk about the judgment in John, because of our long beliefs of heaven and hell, and being pulled that way, and know that this kind of judgment is just at the moment. How are we seeing God's work in the world right now? How is God working through us and through other people? What is our relationship with other people? That how we grow in that faith. That's the judgment. Are we seeing God at work? Do we see God's love for the world? It's a different kind of judgment, and I think that really helps me understand John better. Yeah, Gary. Take yourself off mute.
Sorry. That brings to my mind the whole idea that how dynamic the relationship with God, the faith relationship with God is, the faith relationship with Jesus is. It's not static. It moves, it lives, it changes, it influences me and hopefully those around me. And not everyone I have a relationship with is at the same place that, we're not at the same place. And I need to be understanding about that and listen to the other person, listen to what's going on in the world, and try to apply whatever it is I believe about God and Christ to the situation, and be willing and open to be moved and to move along with what faith does, what God does in the world and in our lives, as far as we know it.
Very well put. I think maybe we should move on to the second question, and that is, what are our blind spots? Can we name some of them? Take a few minutes to do that, and then before Michael does his part. What are the blind spots that we are aware of, both individually, as God's community or His Prince of Peace, and also the ones out there in society and the world that are oftentimes systemic and maybe we don't have much control of? What are the blind spots?
I was reading, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was reading an author who distinguishes between the age of association and the age of authenticity. And you know, what's ahead for the church? Do we know what the church will look like? The congregation, will there be congregation? There are the post-pandemic period. We may be entering a situation where our authenticity, our honesty, our humility will be crucial. And if we just think in terms of association, there remains a kind of distance in that we don't share our own deep feelings. We're not authentic. We're just associating with each other. So I think that's a call to kind of a systemic openness.
That makes, this is Susan, that makes me think of our community and like of small groups. What is the best way that we can help each other be honest and support each other? Whether it's small groups or other kinds of things in the church, you know?
Yes, yes. This forum is an illustration to me because Susan, because I have become accustomed to listening to a lecture. I like lectures. I like hearing them. I like giving them. But to break into a small group and to actually share, I have a few technological problems. I'm not so good with technology. You know, if you have hearing problems, there are issues you may not have heard the person. Your hearing makes you newly blind.
Right.
Jean.
Part of the problem for me too is often trusting that what I say can be understood. I'm not confident. I feel sometimes I just talk on and on, but to try not to worry about what people think about what I'm saying, but just to say what is honest in my heart. And God's grace will be with my words.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, Gary.
I guess just a comment here. We have, in the last 3 years, new neighbors on either side of us, east and west, and across the street too. And the family to our east is of Hmong background, and came here after the wars and all of that. And the family to our west is they are Hispanic. And I tell you what, getting to know these people has been stretching and wonderful for me, because they have taught me so much about so many things, and they're just wonderful human beings, and excellent neighbors, and I hope I am to them as well. But I don't know. That's, to me, that's part of the movement of God and Christ in the world, is that kind of newness of relationship, and getting to know people who think differently, but are at the same time very loving human beings. It's been a real blessing to me.
Well, I live in a senior building, as everyone probably knows, and it's hard to get to know people in a building like this. I may not have the dramatic differences that that Gary just spoke of. It's a beautiful witness. But if in a senior building where the contacts are so limited, how do you venture forth? How do you open yourself without being obnoxious? You know, it's easy for me to live in my past. I think I can control my past. Occasionally my past will surprise me, but usually I'm familiar with, I can locate people, but I'm not living in my past. I'm living now, so the issue is more complicated for those of us who are in a sense cooped up in these, I don't drive a car. This is where I am, and there are people I do not know here.
I think it's really important to have smaller groups in order to communicate and be honest and open with one another. We can't be in relationship with everyone that we would love to. I mean, I look on this screen and I see dear people, and I would absolutely love to know you all better. But there is something to having a smaller group, like let's say 12 people, to get together, even on a weekly or a bi-weekly time, when people can get together and know one another and to be a positive influence in one another's lives. We're missing that. And we've been isolated, like Jean said, for years now. And we miss that opportunity to get together. And of course, because we're new in the congregation, maybe it's even a little harder for us because we haven't been with you people for a long time. But if we could somehow get together in situations like that, I think we would all grow. And I hope Paul can do that too. Reach out and get to know more people. But I would love that. I saw real growth when we lived in the city before, and we belonged to a Bible study. And you know, that's where you have to get together and share and be honest and be open, be kind. Let your troubles be known by this group of people. Somehow it would be wonderful if we could all join a group like that.
Yeah, Kurt.
I guess I have a different perspective. We live in a senior cooperative. I don't have that feeling or sense of there are 150 people in our building, and it doesn't take very long to know who's who, is what's what, and who's thinking what, especially when you're committeeized. Is that a word for it? Committeeized? That you belong to a committee with interest. You soon find out people at the new congregation, as just mentioned. We didn't know anybody when we moved in there, but it didn't take very long with associations and with common interest. It's been really, and we enjoyed it. It opened up a different factor, passion of our lives, and Paul, you need to come over and associate a bit with us. We'll...
So, Carol,
Yeah.
I think I think we need to give Michael his time.
Yep, I was just gonna say that, it's 10:44 or whatever, and yeah, we need to give Michael, and we never talk much about specific blind spots in society or things like transgenderism and racism and ageism and all of that, but I think we're pretty much aware of that. So Michael, go ahead.
Well, I liked what Paul Sponheim raised as this whole question of what is our future as a church, as a people of God? What's it going to look like? And that's the work that's before your congregation council now. And a lot is happening. We are in the midst of exciting and challenging times, as you know. We have major decisions to make, plus which we have this whole task of reconnecting after the pandemic. In relation to this scripture, I see our blindness as twofold, and the solution as a common solution. We have a blindness toward what our role should be in the world, in loving the world, which is part of our mission. We don't know what our priorities should be. Should we be attacking systemic racism in our community, housing, hunger? Should we be spreading the gospel more? What exactly should our relationship be with the world? We don't really know that as a community. Now, individually, I think we kind of do. I'm amazed at the breadth of talent and the diversity of talent in our community. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly right now, I think we're blind to ourselves. I think we're blind to what spiritual gifts we have to offer this community of faith. We kind of default to old ways of doing things and old ways of looking at problems. And how do we solve those problems? How do we learn to see? And somebody else mentioned earlier, it's relationship. And toward that end, we are planning the council. Some of this is just kind of vague, and some of it's even kind of in my mind right now. But one thing we're shooting toward is a large gathering of congregation leaders, people who have been active in the ministries that have existed in this church and do exist now, to tackle some of these things, to address these questions of how should we reconfigure our ministries. Small groups, as Sandra mentioned, have been a part of our discussion for over a year at council. Well, it's time to do stuff. Also, our resources, we have to look again at how we prioritize, how we use our resources. How do we do this? So we plan to launch a new budgeting process and get all those ministry leaders involved in thinking about the resources it will take to accomplish the ends that God is calling us to do. There will be a series of discussions coming up in Lent, prior to Lenten services, about the values that we espouse or that we've identified so far. We need to clarify them, think about them, talk about them, but mostly it's about relationships. And that blindness, I think we need to expose to each other and learn about ourselves what it is that we are gifted to do. You know, we can't sustain this community if we call on the same leaders to do the same work over and over again, and people are kind of begrudgingly do it, but it doesn't really match their passion and what God calls them to do. So I think we need to talk to each other about what our gifts are. We're not all the same, but I think that when we find out in ourselves what it is that God really calls us to do, we will have the energy and passion to devote to it. And believe me, people are fragmented. I've had a lot of trouble. I'm not complaining, but I've had trouble having people engage in leadership, having people, be available for the kind of work that we need to undertake now. Now, you here are a group of leaders. You are some of the most faithful leaders in our community. So what I'm calling on you to do, please, is to watch the communications, leave them, think about, what it means to be a part of this community. I think I can assume in all trust that every single member that shows up at Prince of Peace to worship loves the church. But I think unless we allow people to to love the church in the way that matches their spiritual gifts and callings, that we're going to stagnate. We need to release some energy. And so I'm calling on all of you to just stay tuned to those things and engage in those discussions. And we're going to move into a bright future, I'm sure. Thank you.
Any final word? Well, thank you.
Michael, for those last words.
That means you can't. You're one of the movers and shakers. Time to shake it up. You do already, though, I know.
Well, you can always think of more you could do, or I could do.
But it isn't the right things. I think that's,
Yeah, you run out of that clock too, though.
You do run out of the clock, and if God calls you in another direction, that's fine too. But we just need to be in relationship with each other, honest about what those burdens and opportunities are.
Can I jump in and just say thanks to Carol and Steve and Michael too at the end here for your leadership today and helping us wrestle with these bigger questions and this story of Jesus that draws us ever deeper into a relationship that can only best be realized as we navigate these challenges between us and between other humans and the world that we're called to be a part of. And so thank you for giving us this opportunity to wrestle together in this community. Next Sunday, a little plug for next Sunday, March the 6th, the first Sunday of Lent. Our Sunday forum will be joined again by Caroline Lewis, professor of homiletics at Luther Seminary and scholar of the Gospel of John. She is going to spend some time with us looking at a collection of material that our lectionary sort of jumps over in the coming weeks here. We move from the 13th to the 18th chapter of John in our lectionary. But in those intervening chapters is something called the Farewell Discourse. If you were with Caroline when she did her overview of the Gospel of John, she talked about the Farewell Discourse. And so she's going to come and spend some time specifically exploring that with us. And that'll be next Sunday. The other thing to take note of is she's going to be here at Prince of Peace physically in our sanctuary. And so because next Sunday or this Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, we're sort of encouraging our community to come and gather in person and be a ministry of presence among one another. Yes, those events, both worship and forum, will be available on live stream, as you have all experienced. When we do the hybridized kind of thing, it's a little more challenging, the conversations, and for those who are connecting online, to be engaged and integrated within that conversation can be a little bit more challenging. And so if it works for you to come and be here in person, you're welcome. Of course, you can gather and join us online as well. That means that our timing will be kind of that more compressed set. The forum will begin at 9:30 promptly, and we'll need to end at about 10:15 promptly so that we can be ready for worship again at 10:30. So that's the pattern that is coming our way. But before then, Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. A couple opportunities to stop by and have ashes placed on your forehead if you would like at noon to 1 o'clock or 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Just outside and a drive-up opportunity if you would like. Also. Then worship will be at 7 o'clock, and that will include ash imposition, and that'll be here in the sanctuary, and that service will be live streamed as well. Look in your mailboxes for a mailing information about Lent and our season, and a little opportunity, some little palm ash, if you would like to put on your own ashes on Wednesday. You're invited to do that. Some information about Lent coming your way, and a letter describing the ongoing work around the daycare and some of the stuff that's happening with that. Michael, do you want to do a little preview of what's happening this evening?
This evening, Basically, it's an update on what the work group that's looked at the Caterpillar closing has been doing, joined by some members of the finance committee that have been looking at scenarios under which we would do various options and what the financial implications are. It's also an opportunity for that team and other and the finance people to hear what your questions are so that we can make sure we've got a good solid Q&A and we've got some responses to the questions that are going to come up next Sunday.
So look for the link. That'll be on Zoom. Look for the link for that in today's email, Friday's email. There's also, I think there's something on the website. Pretty sure there is for that as well. So
if you find any old email with the Going Deeper link in it, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, if you see any language for Going Deeper, you click on that. That'll take you there into that conversation this evening. Again, that's at 6:30. So hope to see you there. If not, I'll see you on Wednesday, on Ash Wednesday, in some form or another. Blessings to you all on your day.